Well, I'm glad to have you back, or I hope some of you came back at least for this. It's going to be a long, arduous trek on this Philco 630B. And I decided, before I check all the coils, I decided to clean off the top a little bit. I'm going to remove the tubes and the tube shields, and I'll remove the dial scale, and I might even remove the entire tuner and try to get this transformer off. I'm going to basically strip the chassis down, and then we'll flip it over and go ahead and check out our coils, which will be here, 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 your first and second intermediate frequency coils. I've already checked out the transformer, the power transformer, so I know it's good. So let's start with the on a Philco. You've got of this type, you've got a big old round piece of metal right here, and that is it's just a compression thing that the dial scale fits between it and the one in the rear. And the way it comes off is it's got two holes here and here. Usually it has two holes. Take yourself a little pair of needle nose right there and kind of stick them in and just kind of turn to the left real quick like, and it'll come right off. Now sometimes they may be a little stuck and you may have to hold the tuner from moving. I of course loosened it up already because I'm doing this whole operation with one hand. Otherwise it would wind up just turning on me all the time. Every time I wouldn't be able to hold it with the other hand. So I just loosened it up. But that's the way it comes off, and that's the way it goes back on. Now, it'll have to, of course, be cleaned. All parts I remove will go in this box right here. Let's take off the dial scale. That's all there is to it. The dial scale just pops right off. I'll be getting a reproduction one of these. I bought a reproduction in the past, and they were fantastic. They were great. These are just too dark to let the light through. They just don't do a very good job, whereas the new ones are nice and orange, and they're exact replicas, and they do a fantastic job. That goes in the box, because I think I'm going to be needing this section down here. I'm going to be cutting a chunk out of it later. This over here is the next little jewel, and it'll have to be removed. This is what gives you your three lights on your dial. It's just a piece of plastic that comes out like so. Nothing to it. Just be very careful of it. Now this is actually a light diffuser. You can see where it's kind of cloudy with the exception of the three arrows that let the light through. I just love Philco dials. I can't remember what they call this thing. There's light arrow or something. There's a name for it. I'll think of it later and I'll let you know. But don't just take this thing. Now, this thing's pretty dirty. If you have one, don't just grab a wet rag and clean it off, because water-soluble ink was used on a lot of these old light diffusers and a lot of these old dials. So if you want to keep your dial scale and it's a little dirty, you know, be careful. It may have that water-soluble ink on it. You start washing it with a wet rag and there goes your ink. Bye-bye. It's all gone. You got to get a new one. Okay, now these tube shields. These tube shields have to come off next, but on these three tubes right here, the 6A7, the 75, and the 78, they all have grid caps on them. It's a metal thing on top of the tube. It's the control grid of the tube, and you have to be careful removing these wires, because they can pop that entire grid cap right off that tube. So what we have to do is kind of gently turn it left and right. Now if it turns out to be frozen on there and you really can't hardly get it off, you can separate the metal a little bit with a screwdriver down in there and just kind of pop it loose a little bit and loosen it up from the cap. But be careful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach down there and see if I can't twist these a little bit, maybe see if they're loose. Alright, that one's fairly loose. Now, it feels loose, but that could be the cap moving. So let's find out. Nope, it's the cap solid. Good. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of twist it just a tad back and forth. Easy does it. You could take some WD-40 if you wanted and squirt down in there. It won't hurt it. Now's the time when you can do that sort of thing, because you're going to wind up cleaning it all. Okay, there's the first one off. I'm going to do the same thing with the other two, and I'll get back with you. Okay, the 6A7 wanted to be a little bit stubborn, so what I had to do was take these needle nose and just kind of get it like that. get it where you can see it. My thumb in the way there. You just kind of take it like that and sort of move it back and forth with the needle nose and bring it up, bring it up, bring it up until she eventually pops off. There we go. Now we'll take the tube shields off. Now on these Philcos, these tube shields, man, it's been my experience that they fit really tight. They're not, they weren't engineered all that well, and like this one here, see, it's really tight. It should come off a lot easier. So what I'm going to have to do is use both hands on it without mangling it. Now this one was a little booger. I had to take a screwdriver. Now you can squirt WD-40 down at the top and around and around. And but you go a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Meanwhile, you're moving it with your hand at the top. Just barely ease up on the screwdriver here, barely ease up on the screwdriver. Don't damage these things. Just easy does it. Take your time. And as usual, it finally comes out and the tube remains inside. So now I've got to get the tube out. Normally that's done by pushing from the top down until it comes out the bottom, and there we go. Okay, the tube is out. Alright, once again, this one gave me a real hard time coming off. These Philco shields, they just fit so tight, and over the years they fit tighter and tighter, so you kind of wiggle it, and kind of just a tiny bit, and still you wind up sometimes having this problem. This tube is loose from the base. Boy, it was a job getting that thing out. It was really down in there. I had to actually push the pins from the bottom underneath. Take a screwdriver, put it against the pin, and tap it in order to get it to come up out of that socket. Now, take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. There have definitely been some hackers in here. They kept her going, but this tube shield is not designed for this radio. It's a round one that someone has cut the bottom off of and made it work. And I'm going to have to find another tube shield for that. I may have one at the house. I don't know. If not, I know someone who does. So we got that off. Now we'll go ahead and take out this tube, and hopefully it'll come out without much difficulty. Okay, all the tubes are out, and this tube shield here, now most people would say, well, I think I'll just keep that around in case I need it. Don't do that. It's a piece of crap. It's been cut off by somebody. It's got sharp edges. It does not go to this radio. In the trash it goes. The next step is to remove the bracket that holds the shadow meter. Now this shadow meter has a red and a black wire going to the coil in the rear, right here. And there's also a light bulb wire that goes into the bulb. Now all three of those wires very conveniently have been placed together, and they go down through the chassis. Well, I intend to replace all these wires. I don't like the looks of them. They're a little bit frayed, a little bit looking kind of poorly in my mind. So let me get my pliers that just fell on the floor here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is to make things a whole lot easier for me, because later on I have plans for this chassis. What I'm going to do is, rather than unsolder everything, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it right here. Leave the wires attached underneath, so I won't have to figure out where they go in case I forget later on. I'll also know where these wires go, and when it comes time to replace it, put nice new 22 gauge nylon coated wires on the outside, and we'll be in great condition to do that. So all I have to do now is remove these two screws, and this entire mechanism should lift off. Okay, she has come off, and I put the screws back in the holes. Good practice to do that, so you never lose them. You know they're there. And the wires are still a little bit too long, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut them down a little bit further. Doesn't really matter either way. Come on, cut, baby, cut. Okay, that is it. We'll set that to the side. It's very, very delicate. I'm going to go ahead now and I'll unsolder the three grounding tabs down here at the bottom off of the tuner. I'm going to unsolder this one, and this one. One last item before we call it quits on this part 2. You'll notice that this IF can aluminum top cover is held on with 2 nuts. Okay, it's in good shape. A little bit loose, but still in good shape. This one here, the nuts are gone, and only one of the threaded studs is sticking up through the hole right here, barely sticking up. You'll notice that the whole thing is loose. That's not a good sign. I'm going to have to take the top off of that, find out what's under there. This is what it looks like. We're looking at 2 coils, primary and secondary, or primary and secondary. It's always hard to tell which is which. I always just sort of assumed the top one was the primary and the secondary. What happened is this wire that goes to the grid cap, it let me see, it would be the 75 tube, I think. Anyway, whichever one, 78, 75. It had been replaced at one time. Something had been replaced on it, and it had been the can had been opened up, and somebody resoldered it right there. But they did a really crappy job. It didn't even hold. It just came apart. Now this thing looks pretty mangy. It looks dirty, dusty, crappy. That's because it is. But you know, all the wires are intact, and down here we may have a little bit of trouble with some insulation missing. But we take care of that by covering it up with a little bit of liquid tape. We clean it a little bit, not much, just kind of clean it up a little bit. Clean it with, and then check it out to see if it's going to ohm out properly. If it ohms out okay and the coils are both intact, then we'll just go ahead and put a little liquid tape down in here on this bare looking area. I don't think it's bare, but it's on its way. And we'll protect it, and then we'll put we'll solder the wire back on, a brand new wire. We'll solder some brand new wire back on, and go ahead and reinstall the cap and secure it properly like this one is. One more thing. The inside of these cans have an insulating paper there. See that black stuff there? It's an insulating paper. Don't mess with that if you can help it. Don't tear it. Don't pull it out if you can help it. Keep it intact. Some people call that fish paper and a bunch of other names. It's just an insulating paper. Don't worry about the name. I am happy to report that I just ohmed out the primary and secondary inside this first IF can, and they are good. They look mangy, but they're good. So that's the end of part 2, and I hope to see you next time. This is John.